Our guest speaker was born in Victoria and attended Oak Bay High School. He has 3 children, Asia, Marina, and Connor. Connor is 17 years old and a talented golfer. He is currently working towards the goal of a university golf scholarship. Marina is 15 years old and a high-performance tennis player. And I'm told that Asia is a confident and fiery, that's the word that was offered, 8-year-old, and she enjoys golf and dancing. At 20 years of age, our guest speaker, with a buddy, sailed to Hawaii and back on his 30-foot sailboat. Obviously, he made it with his best friend. He spent many years sailing at the Royal Victoria Yacht Club. And I think we're going to enjoy what he has to say. As someone who is still marveling at the benefits of touch-tone telephone dialing, as opposed to my rotary model, I'm not qualified to introduce Dale Gann, but I will anyway. Some of you will be comforted as I was when Dale and I first spoke about tonight last March. As we talked, and I was aware of all the electronic and space-age equipment which must have been at his command in the office, it was a great relief to hear Dan say, "Just a moment, please, while I get a pen." We welcome Dale C. Gann, President of Vancouver Island Technology Parks and of the Marine Technology Centre. Dale, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Hugh, for those kind words of introduction. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to be here to speak to you tonight. Your Honor, Stephen Point, Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia, it is an incredible honor for me and Connie to be here to speak to you about something that I'm extremely passionate about, the knowledge-based economy. And to all of you, elected and past elected MLAs and friends of the MLA Association, and guests, and especially to the younger guests. I'm a big, passionate believer in the importance of bringing students and young people. They're our messengers, they're the conduit to take these messages back to their friends and spread them. So it's wonderful to see you here tonight. It is a wonderful opportunity to be here that marks such an important year in Great Britain, Canada, and the rest of the Commonwealth. The Queen's Diamond Jubilee. What an amazing year, amazing 60 years of milestones and accomplishment. The Queen recently noted to Parliament when she was there that she has signed 3,500 parliamentary bills during the last 60 years. I think that's something that many of you have witnessed and been part of in your own careers. The last 60 years have seen incredible change, and that progress in technology is what I'm here to talk to you about tonight. So let's see if the technology will work here. So as you said, hello, my name is Dale Gann. And then from here on, I'm going to move to this one, a different piece of technology, so that I can move around. And part of the time when I'm speaking to you tonight, I would love if somebody in the audience, if they either agree or disagree, or have a question, an inquiry, please put up your hand and let's have a conversation. Because I think the things that I'm going to show and talk to you tonight are really important, and I would like to share it with you, but also get your input. So this is me now. I've had a brief introduction, but the important part of this slide is that I am the president of something that I'm very powerfully passionate about, and it's in our community, the Vancouver Island Technology Park. It's a community-based, industry association-led initiative to develop the high-tech industry, and it's owned in partnership with the University of Victoria. One of the things I recognized very early on, like most of you in your own careers, is that we have to do a lot to bring the recognition and awareness. And in Canada, there are 26 tech parks located coast to coast to coast. And when I was involved in the board down in the United States and involved in lobbying in Congress I quickly learned that the activities that we were transpiring in the U.S. weren't really transpiring in Ottawa. So I went about and organized the foundation of the new association, the Canadian Association of University Research Parks for Canada. There are 27. They're owned by universities. They've all had some form of government involvement, and their principal role and mandate is to attract people together to help develop the knowledge-based economy, to help retain and attract talent, to enrich the community. And so I can tell you that 50,000 people today work in Tech Departments Canada, $4 billion in salaries alone in those parks, and they're all very successful, and I want to share a little of those stories with you this evening. So as all of you, we've all learned things along the way. So what have I learned to get here tonight? And Hugh explained to my children, Connor, Reed, and Asia, great lessons, never forget learning from them, and always keep me going, like many of you have all experienced. Kids are important, families are important. And it's been a great learning exercise for me. Mentorship. We've all had mentors, and I've had mentors when I was younger and through my life, and recently one of the mentors I claim to have a unique appreciation for is our Governor General, David Johnson, the past president of the University of Waterloo, and recognizing what he did, and he has been a mentor to me recently. Mentors are incredibly important, and again, to students. Look for mentors, listen to mentors, and always pay your respect to your mentors. They will teach you a lot. So over 18 years, I've worked in the knowledge-based economy with the single purpose of creating a cluster to create an economic improvement to the community I live in. But I realized along that journey that we have to work together, and it wasn't just going to be what I do or what we do here, and what happens in Ottawa and what happens globally has an impact. And I know that many of you who have been ministers involved in files know what I mean when you say it matters what Ottawa does, and it matters what the world is doing. And I think that in the knowledge-based economy it's incredibly important. And so for 18 years I've been learning and sharing that global knowledge, national knowledge back home. So where did I get my sort of can-do attitude to move forward and not accept that we're just here in our own in Victoria, and that I need to take that plane ride to Ottawa, and I need to approach the Minister of Science and Technology, and I have to ask him the tough questions of policy, and ask why we're not getting our fair share of capital into the fine province of British Columbia. I learned that through my experience being a venture capital associate down in San Francisco with a small startup firm that was involved in the whole startup, and that gave me a tremendous sort of confidence, but also recognized how important it is to network. Again, a message to the students being here tonight, what you're doing, as you said, you will remember this in the people you've talked to, and it's the same thing I experienced with this group. We talked a little about sailing. Well, sailing is an important passion of mine, and sailing past these Olympic mountains to the end of the mountains, returning and seeing them leave our coast and my behind as I sailed towards Hawaii was an interesting experience. I did it before we had GPS. I had a sextant. It didn't matter about the depth sounder because it was over 5,000 feet. There was no calling the radio or calling home and getting help. It was you were on your own, and every day you had to just move forward. So I learned that brought me a long way in my experience. And it was really nice to go out and race rocks and saw Victoria and this building and this facility and this community as I came back into the Straits of Montreal. Along the way, another mentor of mine and somebody that we worked with at the time when the elected government was involved in the life science industry, Premier Campbell. The province had a promise. It said one night in front of a whole bunch of people, we want to have a strong life science community, and how are we going to do it? And early on I had recognized from another mentor, Dr. Don Ricks, or Canada, or British Columbia, a very involved individual, how important it is to work together to accomplish activities. And so we formed this group called the Bio Squad and managed to bring British Columbia life science community from the last province to the first province, and our premier ministers travel around North America promoting our fine province. So Hugh asked me to spend a little bit on talking about technology and how it's changed our world. Let's just look at that for a minute. So here we see that in technology today, internet banking, healthcare, education, commerce, communications, and security are all having huge impacts on our education. And so I just want to share quickly a couple of these little stats. And for those in the back, I apologize about the small screens, and I'll share this to you. So it says here on internet banking. Internet banking is now the main means of banking, and 45% of Canadians use it. And we have things like PayPal, where you can pay all for products all over the world. Let's look at healthcare. All kinds of advancements in healthcare. We had a company called Angiotech that did very well on skin implants. We now see this stat here. In 5 years, veins and arteries will be the custom-built cell by cell, and within 10 years, we'll be able to build more complex organs. It's amazing the advancements, how a doctor can go inside us and do all that stuff. And the technology and the innovation is there, but all of these require capital and talented people. Education. Well, here's one interesting one. There are over 300 online degrees by accredited Canadian universities. Stanford, the business school, has on YouTube many new courses produced and put out there for people to share, and for free. Here's another one, communications. Canadians spend $18 billion online, lots of people shopping, and that's going to have a huge effect, and it is having a huge effect to our retail industry. So that's an interesting one to follow, and it impacts us every day. Here's kind of a fun one. 600 million more people own cell phones than a toothbrush. Well, I think that's something we have to correct, and hopefully everybody has a toothbrush. But I don't know that we all need cell phones and mobile devices, but everybody needs toothbrushes. And so I kind of think we got to take some of the revenue from the tech industry and make sure that there's toothbrush and toothpaste for everybody. Here's one. Everybody here tonight has a bank card or a Visa in their pocket, and inside there we've now got chip technology, and so they've come up with this RFID tag. Basically, what I'm saying to you is, no matter where we go and what we do, they know where we are, including our phones, and it's interesting the effect that has. You now can track your children. There are places in the world they put a chip in children when they're born, and those kids are tracked. So there's a lot happening on security. I think one thing to talk about there is when you look at the whole opening the ports and Asia-Pacific development, when there's a lot of good to that, there will be a lot of bad to that, and a lot of those products will have that technology embedded in it to trace and to track. So let's look at the impacts of social media. Who here has a Twitter account? All right, that's a few. How old are you kids? Not yet? Get a Twitter account. When you get home, get one because you want to save your name because the world's taking all the names away. Social media has a big impact. Sometimes we think it's a great waste of time, and sometimes there's some productivity enhancements to it. In the case with my friend Hugh, it was back to pen and paper and mail, and I appreciate that because that's something we start to lose and forget, the actual time of taking a note and handwriting a note. I watched on the Oprah show one time, they said the way to make neat art in your living room is to take a handwritten note that you received and frame it, put it in your living room. It would be the greatest piece of conversation in your living room. So let's look at social media. This is interesting because at social media, the Facebook came along. And in Facebook, what happened was, first it was for friends and families and for students, and now it's become business. And so 2.7 billion likes per day. That means Connie, my partner, has Shelburne Optical, and everybody that likes her site, it passes the information on and we can track the customers. So something that was sort of a tool has now become a productivity enhancement in retail, in government, and in elections, and stuff like that. So it's interesting what's happening with Facebook. More than 22 million Americans use social networks to find a job. What's interesting about that is actually we look online and do our due diligence about you as much as you're doing your due diligence about the job. So that's one thing to the young people, again, in the audience. Watch what you put online because it will always be there. Employers are going to look and see what you posted and who you are. But from an employer's point of view, whether it's a political aspiration or an industry aspiration, we can then see who you are and what you're like and what your passions are. And so we have to be aware of that. Everything is going online and it tells a huge story. Some is good and some is bad. 1 in 6 workers successfully use to get hired. So that's a lot about finding the culture of a company and also applying to a company and building a portfolio yourself. Everybody that's in the election world that's trying to be re-elected will have a full social media campaign today to develop their story. YouTube. YouTube's interesting. It takes 1,700 years to watch all the YouTube videos. What's interesting about YouTube? And it's growing. I have no idea how much it's growing. But what's interesting about YouTube is the fact that it's an incredible device for training. If you want to go home and figure out how to make sushi, go to YouTube and learn how to make sushi online. If you want to learn how to tie your sneakers properly, there's all this stuff out there. The how-tos, the training, how to come to a dinner and speak appropriately to his honor and etiquette, and all that stuff is there. So it's an amazing tool for us, and it's being embraced every day. So I want to show you one for a second. We talked about maps and travel and adventure. So everybody in this room started their life using a map, one of these thin maps that we would plot our adventure on or figure out our holiday. Well, watch this for a second. This is going to take a couple of minutes, but I think it's a really interesting look at where the world's going.
Cartographers in the past have always been focused on getting people from point A to point B. The maps were built for people who were explorers. People were traveling from one country to another on a ship, and they needed a map to guide them. But if you look at what has happened over the last few years, all of us actually have become explorers. We may not be navigating the world in terms of going on a ship for 6 months and discovering new worlds, but we are trying to discover these micro worlds around us.
Google Maps is really, if you think about it, it's mapping for the modern era.
The old maps were paper, they were flat, they got folded up and stuffed into your glove box. These days a map is dynamic, it's live, it's interactive, and it's personalized to you, so it gives you customized things like directions from where you are to where you want to go.
When we came out with Google Maps, it was a technology that really had not existed before. You don't have to click and wait to have the map pan. It's like you just drag it and move it around on a web browser. People had never seen that before.
We called it a slippy map, but it was really the highly responsive nature that let people interact with it, and this really changed how people used maps. And then when we added satellite imagery, this gave people a reason to visit places they'd never been before, just so they could see them for the first time.
And we add Street View that really gives you that sense of familiarity for places that you are going to visit or may visit.
Street View was, in fact, Larry Page's idea. The notion was that there was a lot of interesting information and imagery taken at street level, and he thought that it might be interesting to put cameras on cars, drive around, and then organize this information. It turned out to be quite difficult. We developed our own cameras, and we've been able to actually improve on this platform substantially. At this point in the project, we have a number of platforms for capturing imagery. The most common, of course, is the cars. We also have now snowmobiles. We have the tricycle. The tricycle we in fact put on boats and trains. And we recently took Street View technology into some caves. So we're trying to go everywhere.
The trick that Google has is that we do a great job of stitching it all together and producing one giant picture of the whole planet that you can zoom in and out of seamlessly.
And our goal is really to build a very dynamic map that is changing as the world changes around it. So we, in 2008, launched a product called Google Map Maker. It allows you as a user to edit and contribute map data to Google.
We really rely on our users to help us improve our maps. If a local business closes, it's the people who live down the street who are going to know that first, and we can make sure that change is reflected for everybody.
Maps on the phone has always been something that we wanted to do. It's one of those things that are obvious. One big part of when you walk out the door is knowing where you are and knowing where you're going.
Google Maps on Android, for instance, has turn-by-turn driving navigation, which is really helpful.
But most of us spend most of our time actually in buildings and not outside buildings. So in the mapping space, we've been instrumental in making indoor maps work.
We were able to map hundreds of shopping malls and businesses in the United States and in Japan.
And the hope is that at some point in the near future, every single public space in the United States and the entire world is mapped, and you can localize yourself very accurately when you walk with your handset inside those buildings.
It's pretty amazing to take out my phone out of my pocket and say, this is it. This is what we were dreaming about 10, 12 years ago.
We've come a long way in modeling the world, but the reality is we have a long way to go. Where we're really going, and it may sound crazy, is that we want to rebuild the whole world in 3D. And we're constantly innovating to make that a reality. For example, we're now developing technology that allows us to model entire 3D cities from high-resolution aerial imagery. This will not only make our 3D coverage even more comprehensive, but it will allow us to build a more realistic and immersive mirror world. Obviously, building a map for the modern age is a giant task, but it's one that we're really committed to and we're making great progress on.
So many of us probably have devices in our pockets that we use every day to find places and maps. So it's really interesting to see that the world is trying to be mapped and imaged. And recently in Victoria, I saw Google was here and they were mapping the golf course. They were up at the university. And some of the interesting things is there's great challenges to who owns the actual view, privacy, all kinds of things. And right now in Ottawa, we're having our Minister of Heritage and has come through with a new bill on privacy and copyright and stuff like that. So there's lots of things that are happening from a policy point of view and a technology point of view that we have to keep our eye on. So one of the takeaways from that part of what I'm talking about is information has never been so available and so cheap and easy and shared. And I think that's a statement that we say and we believe, but there still are corners and pockets of our communities that don't have internet and that infrastructure. And so one takeaway, a message, is do whatever you can to encourage the development of more fiber, wireless networks in your communities so that they can take advantage and learn on this great international network. Canada is blessed by a lot of fiber. So one of the things we've all learned also is we've got to follow the money. So let's just look at this thing. Is this thing technology, a trend? Is it a fad? Is it going to go away? Or is it something that's totally important to our economy, our GDP, and our living rooms? So just fun stuff. Facebook went public recently. We saw it in the media, but interesting. Something that started out of a couple kids in a university. Net income of Facebook was $1 billion in 2011. Incredible. They're down in San Francisco, and they just bought 35 buildings. They hired like 500 people a month. It's amazing the growth of the company. Here's one, Google. In 2006, Google bought YouTube, that interesting channel to share videos, for $1.6 billion, which is equivalent to 5 of those new Airbuses. Amazing. Sometimes I find it very difficult to see something that's made out of ones and zeros and rides in the cloud and the internet is worth so much, and then you see 5 Airbuses. I can kind of picture the value of the 5 Airbuses. It's hard to see the two sometimes. Another one is, this is interesting. Just recently, Apple's market share is greater than the US retail combined. Isn't that fascinating to think that all of the companies and the brands, and last night we just had a celebration of Chip Wilson and Lululemon in Canada and what he's done. To think that all the US retailers combined have a lower market share than Apple. It's the market, yeah, amazing. It's amazing. So it's vital to our economy, it's vital to our communities, and I think it's important that no matter what corner of British Columbia you come from, that we recognize it's staying, and we've got to get on board. So let's just look globally. How do we remain globally competitive? Your Honor and I were talking during the dinner about what we're seeing in Asia. So let's look at some of the things. Recently, the Conference Board of Canada came out in 2011 and said, some issues. There's a recent study, 11 cities got together in Canada and looked at how are we doing. Still some problems. Let's look at those problems. The index is based on factors including infrastructure, institution, higher and primary education, among other things. So who's doing it right? Number 1 on the list, Switzerland. Number 2 on the list, Singapore. Number 3, Sweden. Who would have thought India or China would have beat that? Probably most of us. It's interesting to see those 3 countries up there in competitiveness. Now Canada, 12. Why? And recently just fell 2 points. Canada's fallen 2 points in competitiveness. This is really, really important. It's really important to us and the well-being of Canada and the future economic well-being of the province, including our students and young people that are here. So why is it? We've become so dependent, it says, on natural resources. Resources that we all really appreciate and are blessed that we have so many, because it does, a strong economy gives us options to do things socially and other things. It makes us have the chance to have a strong, vibrant bank account. But mining, oil and gas and forestry industries are the primary reason that we're losing in competitiveness, because we're not spending enough in something else. So, back to our fine mentor, His Honor, the David Johnson, Governor of Canada. Knowledge opposed to military might or GDP is gaining momentum as the new currency and passport to success. I think this is a Canadian message maybe to the US because of the military aspect, but GDP matters to British Columbia as much as it matters to Canada. And it really points to the importance of the knowledge economy. So, by recognizing that, it is my belief, and something that I like to do, is go around and say, look, Canada's greatest natural resource is our people. Without a strong resource of people, we can't be good stewards of our natural resources. And we have to do more and more to encourage the development of our people. So let's just look, we're not all doing bad, so let's just look at some examples. An intelligent community. Waterloo. Again, Governor General, President of the University. What did they have and what did they do? Something that's important, and I think our community here in Victoria has done it, and other communities in British Columbia. But the ability to reinvent yourself is incredibly important, because change is happening. We were talking, Your Honor, tonight about change in demographics and population. Change is just all around us, and so you have to be able to reinvent yourself, and that's something that the Waterloo region has done. I will come and talk about our region in a moment. The other one is leadership. 12 years ago, 13 years ago, David Johnson walked into the Chamber of Commerce and said, here's our plan, Chamber. Here's the points we have to accomplish as a community, and let's get on with it and report on how we're doing. The other thing is the university really focused in on production of talent. 1,000 engineers a year, the most in Canada. What does that do? That attracts companies. I've been in Google and many places in the world, and Google's got the permission, wherever there's a brain trust of graduates, continue to expand. It's as simple as that. We're going to hire and attract the brightest people on the planet. That's the step one for Google. And you can see some other ones. So they not recently, a while ago, got voted to doing very well as an intelligent community. So what do they have? And then we're going to look at what we have. They have the David Johnson Research and Technology Park. It was one of the 10 things that he said the community has to do. But the big thing I take away from the Governor General's message, or when he was the president, we all win when we work together and recognize the value of helping our neighbors build our communities of innovation. He says we're a community of barn raisers. This idea that we may have the idea, but we're going to allow the idea to be surrounded by our community and take the idea forward. It was uncommon for a university president to have an idea and then slip to the background and allow the community to surround it. It's something that we need to do in every corner of every community in Canada. So they had leadership goals and they reported on them. They had a strong university and do the tech park. An accelerator center, which you're going to hear more and more about in Victoria, and I'll get to that in a second. Basically, there's a gap. We've got to create more companies, and the companies then create jobs for the young people. And who does that? Who has the focus of doing that? Every one of us in some way has a role of creating jobs, but there was never one place, one door to walk through that had the single purpose is we develop companies. The Accelerator Center in Waterloo was the first to do it. And hats off to them, and now we see more and more. Velocity, this is an interesting thing for students. You're thinking about going to university, you're doing your due diligence with your parents, what university should I go to? They have Velocity, which is a student-led facility that basically, if you're interested in entrepreneurship, and you're from any discipline, you apply to this school, you go to this place, and that's your residence. And you live, eat, and share with students that are interested in entrepreneurship. Interesting. And a strong technical association. So the key to their success, and I've started to talk about this is what we need in Victoria. This is what every community needs: a shared vision and an entirely engaged community. It's easy to say, it's hard to do. I know many of you spent long hours and countless parts of your life trying to do that. But boy, we've got to get on with this. We've got to come up with a shared vision. We've got to come up with a to-do list. And we've got to get our communities engaged in doing it. And we've got to start knocking some of them off the list. Otherwise, we're not going to complete globally or regionally. So look at Victoria. It's not all bad. We're doing really well here. So what do we have? And as I learn myself still, and I meet people like yourselves, and I listen to how you've reinvented our communities and had your roles in making other industries strong, whether it was tourism, when you did your work with tourism or whatever it might be. We have reinvented ourselves in Victoria from not just a tourist town, but to a technology town. It's now the largest employer, 1,000 companies, 2.6 billion in revenue. Victoria, you're hearing more and more about it, this knowledge-based economy. So we have been able to reinvent it. But as we were saying, we've got to continue doing it. The leadership part, I don't think we have the shared goals and the shared vision. I don't think we have that established. There's not one piece of paper that we all stand on and things that really Victoria has to do. We've got to get there. We produce talent, and the University of Victoria is just celebrating its 50th year. It's got its business school, it's got its engineering department, it's got world-class science like Venus and Neptune, and its great co-op programs. It has done a tremendous value in our community, like Camosun College and the other post-secondary institutions in British Columbia. We're getting there, but we've got to work them together. And we have attracted top companies. We've read recently that Microsoft is coming to Victoria and developing and attracting talent, which is great. And we have lifestyle, better lifestyle than Waterloo, I would say. I was born and raised here and still up those mountains. So where do we go from here? What we've done, and what I do during my day, is I run the Vancouver Island Technology Park, which is totally focused on building a knowledge-based economy, sharing, learning, and helping people grow. It's a fertile place where you come into a very large facility, 35 acres, 200,000 square feet of commercial space, 30 companies, 1,000 workers, and you build and share. It's a community. We're celebrating our 10th anniversary. Every year we contribute $380 million to the economy of Victoria. We're in our 10th year. We need to continue expanding it. Each year we hire graduates. Last night I brought a whole table of business students to the entrepreneur dinner to expose them to the industry. That's really important. And UVic's doing a lot. We've recently master planned a Marine Technology Center in Sydney, a master plan for property and space to develop the ocean tech space. We're blessed with the ocean. We have a lot of jobs and support our economy. We have our national shipbuilding contract. So, we're playing a role, but we have to do it together to continue to maximize this. We have a vision, and tech parks we refer to it as the power of place. So, we've got our goals, we've got our great university, we've got our park, and we've got a tech association. We've got a new accelerator going to be announced that's going to focus on Victoria and developing companies. We've got the Technology Partnership Office. But we still have to come up with the shared goals, because this is the innovation stuff. What about the arts? What about the housing? What about the tourism? What about transportation? All of those form and help each of our companies and communities grow. So David Johnson says this: how to tackle the complex integrated challenges of the 21st century in a coherent, and effective way. The answer, I'm convinced, it lies in what we call the diplomacy of knowledge, defined as our ability to witness, to willingness to work together and share our learning across disciplines and borders. When people achieve the right mixture of creativity, communication, cooperation, remarkable things happen. We cannot have economic development plans that have borders. We have 13 municipalities here. We cannot have 13 economic development plans. So, where does that leave me? I've got a couple of takeaways, and then I am going to get out of the way because I know that they want to have some more networking, and that's important because then we can talk about these ideas. So I have a slide up there, and I'll explain it. And it's really important to me, and I think it's important to you. As I meet with people in Ottawa responsible for education, I am always challenged, and I do not understand how education is not a national priority. The answer is it's been delegated to the provinces. I say not good enough. I say it's a national priority, and it shouldn't be just delegated to the provinces. 1 point. Now let's talk about students. We have an amazing Canadian college university system, the post-secondary and K-12 system. But what we haven't done is we know how many students come in the door times revenue, but what we have not done is we've not set targets, retention targets. So let's give you an example. If the Greater Victoria region graduates 5,000 students a year, it is my belief that it's important to set a target. Let's say we want to keep 2,500 students each and every year in our community, so that we can raise the knowledge-based economy, float the tide higher, and become a smarter community. What happens is we haven't set the targets. So what happens is if we don't set the targets, then we can't figure out how to ask the most important question. How? How are we going to retain those 2,500 students? The business school graduates 500 students a year. There's not 500 business jobs. That's a problem. I recently had 75 students at the tech park graduating in August, and I asked, how many want to stay in Victoria? And all hands up. How many have jobs? No hands up. We know that pretty much we try to find a job, and then in 6 months, then we got to move. Now, that's not always the case, but the point is, we've got to set retention targets, then we've got to ask, how are we going to do it, and finally, we're going to say who. Well, I think it's a shared vision that we've got to come up with, and I think it's the community. It's not just up to the university presidents, it's not just up to the government at any level, or the tech association. It's up to all of us, because it's going to improve the vibrancy of the community you live in. So, I will finish on this fact. I believe Canada's greatest natural resources are people, and I think we need to do a few more things to retain them. Thank you very much, and this is how to contact me.
Thank you very much, Dale, and that was quite eye-opening, and I think it puts up quite a challenge to just about everybody in this room. I don't know if anybody in the room has a question you want to ask Dale. He's prepared to answer it. Ken Jones, you got a question?
Dale, you've given us a good message here, and certainly the advancement of the technical side of things is very important to us all. There's also another segment that we need to drive as well that we're very short in, and that's the trades area. Because we won't have the technical capability if we don't have the tradespeople to do the job.
I think it's a very good point, and our government of the day right now has recently announced some great initiatives around the shipbuilding contract, because the marine industry needs talent today, and with the oncoming of the $8 billion on the West Coast of procurement, we're going to need a lot more people. And so the technical trades are incredibly important, and those colleges are doing a great role, but we're going to need it. And as Honor spoke about the demographics and the increased pressures of people coming. So trades are really, really important. I agree.
Thanks, Dale. Any other questions of Dale? What a tremendous presentation. Was there questions out there? Thank you.
Just so everybody can hear. I agree very much with much of what you said. There's just one problem that concerns me. I made a few notes here. You mentioned about the chips where now you can basically trace people where they are all of the time. And that struck me as a little bit of a problem. And also the business about tying your shoelaces, you can find it on the internet. Well, the second one, you know, that there's a social contact of when a father is helping a child or somebody do something. You're basically saying the internet can take over some of those social things that we're not doing. Now, on the first one, I have a friend who worked in the identification field and was asked by an African country to give them some information and knowledge in this. But he read into the question that they were asking of him was so they could control the people in that community. So basically my question is, now that we've got the genie out of the bottle, how do we control it so it's used in the right way, suggesting this evening?
Well, I think it's a very good question. The genie is definitely out of the bottle. The fact is that the two devices that I have in my left and right pocket, the phone and my Visa card, when somebody can pick it up on my wireless network or my IP address. Oh, gee, you know, it's like tackling the internet and the use of the internet. It's a tough question, and I guess it's going to be government policy, I think, that ultimately, but unfortunately there's going to be the economy and opportunity for development that is going to continue to drive it. I mean, the idea of tracing packages and all the good sides of it is great. It's the negative sides of it. I mean, we can talk about, you know, there's always a good and a bad. I mean, the idea of Asia Pacific and opening up ports are great, but somebody that's been in the ocean industry once said to me, my concern is what comes to the shores we don't want. And so it's a little to your point, well, there's good, there's bad, how do we control
I can probably talk long enough. I have one question where I may be showing my naivete. When you talked about employers looking on Facebook and finding out information, and even asking, you know, people actually getting jobs by doing their resume on Facebook, whatever. But my understanding of Facebook is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you can say how much information people who aren't your friends can see. So if you just Google a name or go on Facebook and put a search in, and you get Joe Blow, the first thing it says is Joe Blow only shares certain information with his friends. Now, am I mistaken, or is there ways to get around that?
No, you're right, absolutely. So first you have to be able to friend the friend, and then obviously you have some privacy settings, and you can tighten it down or open it wide open. But more and more employers look to see if you have, if you embrace technology. If you're applying for Google and you don't have a Facebook page, then you may not know your competitor, or you may not be involved in the use of social media. So your question is specifically answered. Yes, you can tighten down the security so that you don't share that stuff.
So that's a safety net.
I think it might be important for you to mention that this is a development strictly happening in Canada, tech parks, or something going on elsewhere. Can you talk about that?
Yes, Your Honor, that's a great question. So globally, there's 650 tech parks in the world, and it's amazing. There are parks that are totally single-purpose for oncology, all the way to multi-purpose parks for like ours here in Victoria. The U.S. has 155 of them, but really the ones that really are pushing the envelopes are people like the resource-rich communities that have put their hand up and said, we want to be something beyond the natural resource, i.e. petroleum. King Abdul stood and said, you know what, we've got to be a knowledge-based economy, and I'm going to invest $10 billion to develop a university city and a research park so that the ideas can transfer to a business environment and then transfer to the marketplace. China, again, has them, and I visited one in Singapore wherein they have 2 million square feet that was built and turned on and developed in 2 years. And what was really interesting about that project was the people that run it, when they go to the government, the private investigators that are in life sciences, don't constantly apply for grant funding. They apply once a year, they get all their money, and then they're back to work on the bench. And here in Canada, we have our smart people always applying for grants and spending a lot of time and effort in applying for grants versus being at the bench. And so that was an interesting lesson in some of them. But you're right, Your Honor, there are amazing master plans and economic development around these parks. 2 people.
Dale, how can we, this is a Vancouver Island Technical Park, what can we do to help you?
It's a great question, and I appreciate you asking, because sometimes we don't get that question very often. The university's been a tremendous leader and steward, and so has the province to start with. The question really comes, we've done a lot to make sure that Ottawa recognizes them, and obviously having one named after our Governor General has taken us a long way. But to his honor's point, there are nations outside of Canada that say, you know what, they're tools of the modern infrastructure of the future, and we're making investments in them. Ours is full, it's vibrant, and it contributes to the economy. We need to expand it so that we have more space for students to be in companies. So we got to go back to our shared vision of how we're going to develop our community, whatever community is, and what is the infrastructure? Well, internet and fiber, universities and post-secondary, research labs and tech parks. These things have to come together. I think Hugh wants us to ask
just one more question, Bill.
He's pulling me off the stage.
One more question.
Please.
I think what I'm really trying to do is address the elephant in the room. And someone who's spent a lifetime in the information business and who believes that, in a sense, the more information, the better. It's the issue of privacy. And in your talk, you alluded to it slightly when you mentioned the Google mapping. And recently, when they were on the university campus here at UVic, they did run into some problems with individuals objecting to the cameras taking pictures of you just walking around the campus. And this whole business of privacy, as far as the internet is concerned, is a huge, I go so far to say, problem, which has not really been addressed. So I'd like to hear what your philosophy is about that.
Well, as I say right now, Minister Moore and the Conservative in Ottawa government have just passed a new bill on copyright and privacy, and I agree. I mean, as you say, there's a good and a bad, and I think for all the good the internet has done, there is a lot of bad, and you know, how are we going to control it? And it's a fabric world, and it's not just up to us. It's interesting. I mean, we can't agree on climate change. I mean, how are we ever going to agree on internet usage, privacy? I mean, it's the reality. Climate change, we can't agree on how to tackle it. And now internet, it's another one. It's just a wide open door. It's like a free environment to develop. So I appreciate privacy. I think we all recognize that. But you know what's interesting, and I'll close with this. You know, for all the great things the internet does and all the worry of privacy, we still as a country don't even have we can't even put our patient health records on the internet in a cloud in a way that allows a couple of doctors to look at our health. Right now we still keep our patient files in a paper file folder behind us. And there's really no great benefit of that other than we know someone else isn't going to read it, but we sure don't know whether or not 3 doctors are going to make their opinion on your particular ailment. So,
thanks, Dale. That was tremendous. Thank you for that. And we did work out a little I'll advance the podium. Yes, sir.
Just, ladies and gentlemen, that completes the formalities of the evening. Your Honor, would you like to say a couple words?
I was just going to thank the comments. It's not going to go upstairs.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise. Ladies and gentlemen, the evening's not completely over. There's a bit of wine left on the table if you'd like to finish that. There's also a Diamond Jubilee exhibit up on the 2nd floor, and if you wish to write a message to Her Majesty, there's some paper there, and we will bind those in a book and send them to Buckingham Palace later in the year. Other than that, thank you very much for your evening.